Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nearly 3 weeks ago, I rose on the Senate floor to commemorate the life of Rachel Jacobs. Earlier that morning, I had attended her funeral, and it was an incredibly sad event, one of the saddest events I've ever attended. Rachel was tragically killed in the horrific Amtrak crash that we're here to talk about here today. She was only 39 years old when her life was tragically cut short. She was the beloved daughter to dear friends of mine, Gilda and John Jacobs. She was a wife. She was the mother to a beautiful 2-year-old son, and the CEO of an education startup in Philadelphia. And although she lived in New York, she never forgot her roots in the Detroit area. She was a co-founder of Detroit Nation, an organization that engages former residents of the Detroit area in cities and communities across our great country. We have suffered incredible loss in our area and our families with the passing of Rachel Jacobs, and my heart certainly goes out to her family and to the families of the 7 other victims of this tragedy. This accident was likely caused by human error, as we're still grappling to get more information as a result of that, and certainly positive train control is designed to address the kind of human error that may have been the contributing factor to this error, which means that it could have prevented this accident. And what is troubling to me is the NTSB has been saying since 1990, that we need PTC on our rail networks in order to prevent accidents like the one that we just saw and to save lives. And I know implementing this is costly, and I know it's complicated, as we have heard here, but we have to move forward with the utmost haste to get this job done. Every day we delay, we increase the odds of another tragic accident. And anybody here who is advocating for a delay in PTC, I just ask them to put themselves in the shoes if they have to look in the eyes of that father or mother who lost a child, or a spouse, or to see that young kid. This is something that has to be done. This is an issue that we cannot accept failure in. We have to deal with. And it's clear from the testimony today that we have a ways to go. But what is really troubling to me is that we had a situation with the automatic train control from Amtrak that potentially could have prevented this accident as well. And it's my understanding, and what I've heard from the testimony today, is that back in 1991, 400 people were injured in an overspeed derailment. So the Amtrak then took steps to address speed on various curves, and to think that even though we don't have positive train control, that this ATC could have prevented this accident, and in fact it was installed on the southbound track and not on the northbound, is even more disturbing, that it could have been prevented. My question to you, Mr. Stadler, and we've heard that you've since made these corrections on that curve, but what was the expense, time commitment necessary to make that change on that curve?
First, let me respond. The safety of our passengers and our crew is the most important thing to Amtrak, and we deal with it and talk about it every day. We're heartbroken and saddened by the incident, and it was devastating to us as well. And from the beginning, we took responsibility for our part in the accident. And I too, my heart and thoughts and prayers go out to all the families of the deceased and the victims injured. I don't have the cost of putting that in. I will say that the limitation of the system is such that it's designed for avoiding train collisions and not for overspeed. The limitations make it so you can only do certain reductions. So you can only force the engineer to go down to 45 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, or 20 miles an hour. So it's not a feasible system to use for speed control up and down the corridor. Part of the reason why, when we looked at the curves back in 1990, 1991, was the limitation of the system made it so we only identified the highest risk curves. The railroad was safe for 28 years. It had been 28 years since a fatal derailment. Again, this tragic event made us relook at the criteria under which we applied those corrections. We have worked with the FRA through their emergency order to identify other curves. There are about 6 more that we've protected. But to your point, positive train control is the system that will prevent these accidents.
But this system could have slowed this train down had it been identified.
Had we put a code correction in place at that curve,
Which is a pretty minor change, is to put a code correction in?
it is, at that particular location, it's not it's pretty minor, I would say that's a fair statement.
So a minor correction on this track could have prevented this accident and saved these lives.
Again, there are numerous places up and down the corridor that have the high-risk curves that were identified by this safety group with Amtrak.
Why was this not identified as a high-risk curve when obviously we had a terrible tragedy on this curve?
The methodology, when we made those decisions, looked at the approach speed and if the approach speed was high enough to cause the derailment in the curve. Because the approach speed going northbound was 80 and a speed of 80 in that curve would not have caused a derailment, it was not deemed to be a high-risk curve.
So you do not consider the fact there might be human error where an engineer is traveling faster than the speed limit?
At the time of the decision, the theory was we thought the human error, we assumed the human error would be not slowing down for the curve. We did not take into account the fact that the person may be speeding, the engineer could be speeding going into it.
So now you are correcting that matrix throughout the system on the corridor?
We have complied with the emergency order, and we are working on identifying the curves where the situation exists that the FRA identified, and we are making additional corrections.
And when will all those be completed?
Some of them are completed now. We're working with the FRA on a mitigation plan, but it will be soon.
When do you expect that? You say soon, what does that mean?
I don't have the answer for all of them, but it's within weeks.
Yeah. Obviously, it has to be as soon as possible, and then we have to work on positive train control. I know I'm out of time, but Chairman Thune, I would certainly hope that we need to have another hearing after the NTSB has come back with their findings. If we could have a hearing to really delve into this, because this is obviously of extreme importance to so many people.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Peters.